Welcome to the J.John and Tom Wright podcast. Hello, Tom.
Hello, John. Good to be with you.
Always good to be with you. We've been talking the last two episodes, Tom, about the Christmas story, and I'd love us to continue that. The stable. Where was Jesus actually born?
Well, he was born in Bethlehem, but the word which is used, which has often been translated as though it's a stable, is actually a room in a house where there's no room upstairs, so they're downstairs, which is where the animals will be brought in at night. It's one of those two-level houses, and we often have translated it, there's no room at the inn.
Yes.
But actually, it almost certainly wasn't an inn. It wasn't a hotel or whatever. It was an ordinary house that would have living accommodation upstairs and then animal accommodation downstairs. That would be quite normal. And this is one interpretation. There are others, but this is the one I think is most likely. And so they're allowed to come in, and there they are in with the animals. But there's a lot of mythology that has crept up around that, the ox and ass and camel and so on. And well, maybe. Those accretions, which are not in the New Testament itself, are ways of saying something about when God comes to dwell, then all creation will somehow come together and worship and be present in a new way. And so I don't mind the ox and the ass and the camel as symbols, but as long as we don't think that they're really what the story was about.
No, but when I get to heaven, when I'm in heaven, I want to meet the midwife, because I think there must have been a midwife. There must have been a woman who helped.
Of course, most communities, all communities except the most extreme rural ones right out in the sticks, would have people around who would know how to do things. And the fact that we have official people who are trained and qualified, etc., blinds us to the fact that in most traditional communities, there's somebody who knows what to do when there's been a death, how to lay out a body. There's somebody who knows what to do when there's a woman goes into labor.
Yes.
And people show up and they do what they do without necessarily having to wear badges and nurses' caps and so on. So I think, yes, to be sure, in Bethlehem there would be one or more women around who would come and help. Yeah. But I have to stop you when you say when you get to heaven. We're talking about the new heavens and the new earth.
And the new, of course.
We all slide back into this going to heaven language. But
yes.
That's basically Plato. There's a lot of Plato up there, but there's a lot of Bible down here, and that's what really matters.
So the significance, Tom, of Bethlehem, the stable, what's the significance of that for us?
I think, there's all sorts of things which, and if I was preaching a series of sermons over Christmas, then these are some of the things that might come out. That one of the hymns says, not in a royal house or hall, but in a stable dark and dim, the word made flesh, a light for all. And I think from the Old Testament, if you were putting together a composite picture of a king who would come, then you might well end up with something really rather like what's going on up the road in Herod's palace, or memories of the great days of King David and Solomon or Josiah or Hezekiah or somebody, that God is going to bring a great king. And there'll be a big stone palace for him to live in, and tutors to educate him, etc., etc., etc. And instead, it's about as humble as it can be. It's almost falling off the bottom socially, and so the humbling of God, which then becomes one of the great themes in early Christian reflection. Paul says he was in the form of God. It's difficult to translate that bit in Philippians 2, but did not regard his equality with God as something to exploit, but emptied himself. And that emptying, I do not know whether Paul knew the story in Luke 2. It's quite possible he did, but I hear that story in this idea of emptying, being formed in the likeness of humans and coming to be in human form and humbling himself further to the death of the cross. So in a sense, it's an anticipation of the cross. The cross is the ultimate moment of public humiliation. And you know, the cross is just a horrible, horrible thing, which polite Romans didn't mention crucifixion because it was so horrible. It's the sort of thing you didn't say in front of your great aunt, you know, because she'd have to go get the smelling salts out. Yes. But in the same way that the humiliation of the birth already anticipates the humiliation of the death.
Yes.
I mean, there's a lot of, the way that Luke has constructed his gospel, a lot about the beginning, which points on towards the end, and that'd be a whole other talk we could have.
Yeah. I love all the miraculous details of the Christmas story. You know, you've got the angels, the shepherds, the wise men. I mean, it was magnificent.
Yes, and magnificent, but also quite intimate and puzzling. I mean,
yes.
For years, I knew the Christmas story from childhood because, you know, growing up in a church-going family, you hear it, you sing it, you do it. But it was only comparatively late on in that development that I realized the significance of the child being in the manger, because then the angels say to the shepherds, you will find the baby wrapped up and lying in a manger,
yes.
which is the most bizarre thing. You know, you're like saying, you'll find the child in a shoebox or something.
Yes.
And I think, what on earth is this? And yet we go down the street and here is this child in a shoebox. I mean, this must be what the angels are talking. So it's a way of confirming to the shepherds that the angels were telling the truth. They really were messengers from God, and they weren't just hallucinating and imagining it, etc., etc. And so that wrinkle in the story, which you'd never have made up, you know, at least I don't think you'd have made it up.
Of course not.
That it's a way of saying this totally unexpected little detail was what confirmed to the shepherds both that the angelic vision was real and that this really was the child of whom the angels have been singing, the one who was born, who will be the true king, etc., etc. But you've still got to work out, what does it mean to have a true king? You know, many of them, certainly the shepherds in the fields outside Bethlehem, mention of a true king. That means a new David. That means somebody who's going to defeat the enemies and rebuild Jerusalem and liberate the people from their slavery to the nations. And Jesus doesn't appear to do that, or not in the way people expected, because he has a different enemy in mind who he's going to defeat, and a different temple that he's going to build in their midst, and a different mission to the world from the one they'd imagined. So the whole time there's this to and fro, and the shepherds are absolutely onto something, but they still only get to phase one, and there's a lot of learning still to be done.
A lot. Who were the wise men, Tom? There's so many different stories. I think the thing is, with all these wonderful little infant school nativities.
I know. Oh, and we've all been there and seen our kids dressed up in cardboard hats and so on.
Tea towels.
And none the worse for that. Now, in the ancient world, for a long time, there were traditions of wisdom, of astronomy and astrology. In the ancient world, astronomy and astrology were not separate. They were part of the same thing, as people have been studying the stars and the planets. And if you're in a country like Persia, Iran, and that area, you get these wonderful clear nights and you can see exactly what the stars and the planets are doing. And if you've got books where your predecessors have been keeping track of eclipses and so on, there's an awful lot that you can learn and know. And in the middle of that, the stars and the planets seem to be telling stories, seem to be symbolizing different things. And it is perfectly feasible to think that there was some astronomical phenomenon. I do not know what it was. No, I have read various accounts, but I'm not convinced by any of them.
No, but obviously these wise men were led by this.
By a star, or was it a comet, or was it a combination of planets? Again, people have speculated, people have run astronomical experiments on computers and come up with maybe it was this, maybe it was that, maybe it was a special conjunction of several stars or planets or whatever. I'm not an expert on that. I've seen articles about it, and each time I think, oh, that's interesting, but it's not quite what the other people were saying. So, but I think the point was, it's highly likely that people in that part of the world, especially Iran, Persia, that they would come from the East because they'd seen something which was extra specially striking. Now, we can't prove it. There's only one account of that in Matthew's Gospel. But this is normal for ancient history. Most of what we know about ancient history, we know from one source and one source only. You know, it might be Herodotus, it might be Thucydides, it might be Sallust, it might be Caesar, but there might be a bit of confirmatory evidence, there might be a little bit of archaeological evidence, but mostly it's one account.
Yes.
And so when we have the one account in Matthew, we shouldn't say, oh, it's only Matthew. We should say, well, that's interesting. That might well make sense. And that doesn't prove the skeptic who says, oh, this was all made up later to fit somebody's scheme. Well, logically that might be so, but we have no reason to suppose that the early Christians did make up that sort of a story. So I can't prove that it did happen, but nobody can prove that it didn't. But then it does fit in, of course, with the prophecies about nations will come to your light and kings to the brightness of your rising and so on.
So who were these wise men?
Probably highly learned, what we would call, as I said, astronomers or astrologers from one of the eastern countries, quite possibly Persia or somewhere, if you go east from what we call the Middle East, out towards India, Afghanistan, those regions. Those regions, yeah.
Now, they were obviously prompted somehow to bring gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So there was some kind of spiritual illumination. So those particular gifts, Tom, why those gifts, and what is the symbolism of those gifts?
People have done all sorts of things with those gifts. People have said gold is basically royal. This is because he's a king. Frankincense is because he is God incarnate, and you burn incense before the incarnate God. And myrrh is one of the spices that you put with burial.
Yes.
And so people have said, there we are, he's the royal king, he's God incarnate, and he's going to die for the sins of the world.
Yes.
Now, I feel that's a little bit glib, and it may well be that there are other meanings and other levels which could be explored. Matthew doesn't even hint at other levels, where he just, there it is, go with it, see what you think. But I think one of the key things, which we haven't mentioned yet, but is really, really important, is what they do. They come to the country we now call Palestine or Israel or whatever, Judah as it would have been. And because they believe that they've seen a sign of a king, in the stars, they go to Herod's palace.
Yes.
Because that's the royal place around here. They are looking, like many people, for the wrong sort of king. And it's very interesting because they have all this wonderful evidence in the skies, but it brings them to the wrong king. And in the king's court, they need somebody who knows the Bible to tell them, actually, it's Bethlehem you should be looking at.
Yes.
At the same time, those scribes knew that Bethlehem was the place where the Messiah should be born, but they didn't bother to go and look and check for themselves. There's that sort of sense that you need the witness of creation, but you need Scripture to supplement it. And you need Scripture, but maybe until you've put it in its larger context of God's purposes for all creation, you may not be prepared to follow where Scripture might actually have been pointing. Isn't that interesting? There's sort of convergence.
Fascinating.
And then, of course, it's such a very dark story. There's old Herod, who is, by this stage, a malevolent deeply suspicious old man, full of conspiracy theories, ready to kill his own children or one of his own beloved wives, if he suspected them of plotting against him. Everything we know about Herod the Great is that he's a classic example of the elderly tyrant who is clinging on to power and going to rub out anyone who's in the way. So when he hears that there might be a new young king born, and not even in his palace either, thank you very much, then naturally he is upset by this and wants to know about it. And the wise men pick up the signals. They're warned in a dream. They don't go back to him, but he then, of course, does what he does, sends and has the boys in Bethlehem killed.
I know.
Yeah.
I mean, that must be terrible.
But it was exactly how many people behaved. When King Herod was dying, not that long after that incident, he knew that most of his people hated him, so he wanted there to be mourning at his funeral. So he gave instructions that when he died, all the leading citizens of Jericho were to be killed, so that there would be plenty of weeping and wailing at his funeral. And that's the sort of man he was. Now, fortunately, that order was rescinded after his death. But unfortunately, in the ancient world, as in some parts of the modern world, people think nothing of 10 or a dozen babies here and there. You know, we're talking here in the autumn of 2025. There have been horrible things going on in the Middle East, in Ukraine, etc. Tyrants just don't care if it's another whole school full of children. So Herod doesn't care if it's another whole town full of baby boys. You know, it's just how things are.
But it's so, when it talks about the wise men, I like that line, they bowed down and worshipped him.
Yeah.
So, you know, they came from the East.
Yeah.
They probably didn't know our Old Testament.
No, they weren't Judeans. Exactly. No, exactly. They weren't Israelites. But yes, they're ready to worship. And of course, that then is a theme which Matthew highlights at various points. In Matthew 8, Jesus says, many will come from east and west and sit down at a table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, while the sons of the kingdom are cast out. You can see exactly that. Here are these guys coming from the east, while Herod and his court don't want to know.
Don't want to know, yeah.
And that pattern continues.
Sure. But they must have seen more than just the star. They must have seen, this is the one.
Yeah,
because that whole posture of bowing down, you know, prostrating yourself and worshipping Jesus, that they were given this illumination.
Absolutely. And I think it says, where is he who was born king of the Judeans? Because we know from various sources in the Persian period, that's basically the end of the Babylonian exile, the Persians take over, and then on through from there till you get the Syrians and finally the Romans. But throughout that period, there is quite a strong memory that something very strange happened. Why did those Judeans get to come back to Jerusalem? No other exiled people ever did that. And the answer was because Cyrus, the Persian king, knew that it was his job somehow to send them back and tell them to rebuild Jerusalem. And word went out that the Judeans and their God are kind of special, and that their God does do strange things. You see this in the prophet Malachi. The prophet is cross with the priests and the people because they're being careless in their worship, and says, actually, the Lord is going to be magnified way beyond the borders of Israel. There are people out there who will recognize and see that your God is the great king of all the earth. So why can't you worship him as he deserves? And I think what we're seeing with the wise men is that the long rumor that the God of the Judeans was the true God, however mysterious he was, meant that when then they have a symbol in the heavens, whether it's a combination of Jupiter and Saturn or whatever it is, or some comet, which says King of the Judeans, oh my, this may be quite significant, because maybe, just maybe, the God of the Judeans is on the move, is doing a new thing. So maybe, like many will come from east and west, that's what's going on.
I do always wonder, what did Mary and Joseph make of all this?
Absolutely.
They must have been, like, stunned.
Absolutely. Well, And Luke says Mary kept all these things and pondered them in her heart.
In her heart.
Yeah. It's a lovely. We'll file this away. We'll put it down there somewhere. And Mary's memory. And of course, many people think that Luke had known Mary.
Yes.
And that he got some of these tales from her, but we can't prove or disprove that.
What a story. Great to talk to you, Tom. Thank you so much.
Thank you.